set up,
Okay.
just to kind of send people over to the YouTube, just so you know. But you don't have to be on there or anything. So it's fine. All right, everybody, welcome to Gogotalx, brought to you by GOGOTIX. I'm your host, Malachi Johns. Today we welcome my good friend, Chris Richards, pop critic for the Washington Post. Thank you for bearing with that very awkward intro. Clearly a television producer, I am not. So how you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. Turn the tables. Usually this is the other way around. Usually you're
Right.
me asking me for stuff, so this will be fun. Get to interrogate you like you interrogate me. No, I'm just kidding, man. So you are, of course, like I said, the pop critic for the Washington Post. So can you give a little background, including your fancy punk rock go-go story that you just told me, about your background in music and how you sort of got into what you're doing?
Sure, absolutely. I grew up out in Maryland, in a town called Arnold. You know it well because we bonded over the fact that we lived basically on the same street at different times in this suburb of Annapolis.
Yep.
But it's just right outside Annapolis, across the river. And you know, I guess everyone thinks their background is the normal, typical one, right? So I used to always say, oh, it's just like a normal suburb, but I realized that no matter where you grow up, that's normal to you. So, but Arnold was pretty quiet. But DC felt close, you know, and the music that was happening in Washington really captured my imagination when I was young, especially the punk rock scene that had been going on in DC for years and years and years. So I started going to punk shows in Washington, you know, when I was a teenager, and I had already known about go-go from just hearing it on the radio. But my first exposure to it, actually, that I remember is my father was a carpet salesman, and he worked at a carpet store on University Boulevard down in Adelphi. And the people who worked at the shop with him were like, there was like a thing called like the floor crew, and they were the guys who would like roll out the carpets, cut them to size, put them in the trucks, all that stuff. And all those guys were like teenagers from the neighborhood. So it was like, you know, black, white, and Latino dudes who to me were like big brother kind of figures. And they would listen to the radio there, and they got a really out of like when I'd go in with my dad to the carpet store when I was like 10 years old, and they'd play, you know, hip hop radio and Chuck Brown and Veracruz and whoever else was on the airwaves at the time. And then I'd come back the next Saturday and they'd like quiz me on it, and I'd be like, oh yeah, that's Heavy D, you know what I mean? And they just got the biggest kickbacks ever because this little white boy was learning about all this music that they were into. So, but to me, they were like the big older brother kind of figures, you know? So I loved hanging out down there, and it was my first exposure to go-go music. The thing is, I didn't realize until way, way later that go-go was DC exclusive pretty much. Like when I got to college, I was playing it for people and they'd be like, what is this? And I was like, you know, it's Trouble Funk. You don't know this? And people didn't have a clue. And I was like, oh, right. You know, just because it was on the radio without any special fanfare growing up. So anyway, deep in the punk scene, though, that's like the community that I came up in and was participating in as a musician. I played in bands. I went to college at George Washington University in 1997 is when I started there. And there I started to realize that the go-go punk connection had a history somewhat. I mean, mainly in that the punk bands really, really admired the go-go bands in a huge, huge way. And there were like fabled concerts that happened back in the 80s. So the band I was in my early 20s, like during college and after, was called Q and Not You. We were on a record label in DC called Discord Records, which was like Ian Mackay from Minor Threat and Fugazi is his label, and he was like our musical mentor and is still like, you know, a dear, dear friend to me, family almost, you know, I'd say, in my heart. So through playing in Q Not You, we were busy. We toured a ton. We played overseas. We toured Europe, Japan, South Africa. You know, it was crazy. But one of the coolest shows we ever got invited to do was to promote this student documentary that some kids at Georgetown had made about go-go music. And it was a show, like the premiere of the film, essentially, at the Lincoln Theater. It was my band, Q and Not You, Uncalled For Band, and I think Sugar Bear was like the headliner, like solo. But for us, UCB was like it, and we loved them so much, and we played their CDs on tour. When we would be on tour, we'd have like the warm-up music where, you know, you give the sound man the disc, they're gonna play some like whack thing that they think you sound like, and it just puts it bad. They were in there. So we started bringing our own CDs to play before we went on stage, like why we set up our gear and all. And we played that Back to Basics CD like crazy on tour. It was great because you'd be in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and after the show, people would be like, "Hey, cool show. What was that CD that was playing before you guys?"
Yeah.
So it was a cool way to spread the gospel of go-go outside of Washington in our own little way. But being able to play with UCB and share a stage with them was like just huge for us. And you know, Brock Mikey wanted to like do a collaboration, so he through the promoters gave us a call, and we were like, "Is this a prank or something?" You know, but he came over to rehearsal and he wrote a little rap to one of these, or just kind of got a feel for a song. I think that we could do like a jam on live. Right. And at the end of it, like for the last song, he kind of came out and like freestyle, I guess, over this song of ours called Soft Pyramids, which was kind of like our hit. It's like our #1 Spotify tune. So I guess that's like the single, right? And it was awesome. It was a dream come true for us. And then the craziest thing is that like as soon as they were done with our set, they got in limousines and drove off to like another show. And we were just like blown away by this.
They got limousine. Wow.
Stuff, but one that they could have another gig that night was like, what, you know, so crazy to us, which I know in go-go common occurrence because these bands would get out there and make it happen. But at the time, you know, we were a band that in our mind was like, you leave everything on the stage, you know, you go crazy. And like we were a really physical group and went nuts. And the idea of play another show after we had just played was impossible. But these guys had just mopped the floor with us in the first place, and then we're going to go do it again somewhere else. You know, we were blown away. So it was one of, you know, when I think of the highlight reel of my times playing music, it was one of the highlights for sure. And then after that, music journalism came later. The band broke up when I was 26. At the time, I had a day job at the Washington Post, like working as a thing called copy aide. It's basically like working in the mailroom, answering the phones. There were still fax machines pumping out faxes in those days, so you bring faxes to reporters' desks. And I started freelancing that way. I kind of got in with the Music Critic at the time and was like, hey, you know, like you should send me to some concert review. Or actually, I think he figured out, he's like, oh, you're going to go to that Young Jeezy show at Love or Dream or whichever it was at the time. It's like, oh, you should write a review, you know? So so I started doing little concert reviews here and there. I met you a few years after because I did a story about Mambo Sauce, of course.
Yep.
And after years of freelancing, I went to New York and I was editor of the Fader magazine for like a real quick minute. It was about 6 months. Got fired quickly for not knowing what I was doing.
I remember that conversation that we had. Yeah.
I called you with tears in my eyes. But it's good. The failures in life, they shape us in a really positive way. And I was out of my league for sure. I had never managed people before. I never edited copy. I was just enthusiastic about music, but that wasn't quite enough to keep the gig. So I was freelancing in New York for a couple of years, and then the Post was going to hire a new music critic. My mentor at the Post was this guy, Josh Dulac. J. Freedom Dulac was his byline in the paper. He was moving on to another part of the newspaper. So he's like, you should apply for this job. And I did. That was 2009. Here I am, almost 11 years later, holding it down, trying to do the best I can for the music that's made in this city and elsewhere.
Dope. That's dope.
Thanks.
It's funny in hearing your story, I realized that we have even more in common than I originally. So I was into the punk scene as well in Annapolis. A few years before you. I'm a little bit older than you, but and in the same way that you didn't realize that go-go was just a local thing, which I didn't really realize either. I didn't realize that like Bad Brains and Minor Threat and all the top, you know, like the very influential punk and hardcore bands were literally from DC too, because I didn't really start going to DC until I started playing in go-go bands, which was a little bit later. I didn't, you know, I was like 12 or 13. My mother wasn't letting me drive all the way, you know, or ride all the way to DC with my less than savory friends at the time. But yeah, and then what was it? There was something else. Oh, just in spreading the gospel, like when you went to college and stuff. I did the same thing. Like I went to college in Montana. My father was. Oh, that was the other thing. Is that Adelphi? So my father, when we first moved to Maryland, like I was born in Oklahoma, I have no recollection of it. I was a year old, and then we moved to Maryland because my father got a job as an architecture professor at University of Maryland, and we originally lived in Adelphi, of which I have no recollection either. But it's just funny that there's that connection there as well. And then he then went on to Montana State in Bozeman, Montana, and that's where I ended up going to college. And the same thing. Like I was on the radio station out there, like playing, playing everything, and I was so excited. I almost had a heart attack when I realized they had this room just full of vinyl, like thousands of vinyl records, and they had a Trouble Funk. I don't remember what the record was. They had a Trouble Funk record, and I was so blown away because by that time I did realize that it was. That it was sort of a local thing, but I was still so blown away by that. It's so cool. But my intro music to my radio shows was the instrumental version of "Good versus Evil" by Intimate Groove. If you remember that song.
Oh, cool.
They want to test me, try me, but trust me, you're going to catch a beat down. If you remember that song.
Oh yeah.
Maybe a little bit before your time, but anyway, so it's just funny that we have some of the same, because obviously I grew up in Annapolis and then lived in Arnold later on, so we have such a similar story. That's funny.
Yeah. We've been following each other around.
I know, right? You've been following me my whole life, Chris. What's going on?
Maybe I'll be in California soon.
Oh yeah, maybe. Hey man, I'm telling you, this is where it's at, bro. I love it. Oh, man, I love it. My man Bootsy Vegas has joined the stream. He has screamed your name in text, Chris, with 7,000 S's on it. If you remember, Solly Williams, E of Open Tribe, aka Bootsy Vegas, aka whatever other 7,000 nicknames he has on his voicemail. So he says hello. So what does a day in the life of a pop critic look like? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, great question. It's really wild because the Washington Post, in case you haven't noticed, music is not the thing that it's most well known for. It's a newspaper centering on political coverage in Washington, D.C. But that said, we've had a long dedicated arts and culture department, and there are many pop critics that came before me. Mm-hmm. And part of the gig for me has been making sure that we're covering what's happening in our community, as well as what's happening, nationally, internationally, in this digital everywhere that we all kind of live in today. So for every Lady Gaga concert review, I want to make sure that I'm writing about something that's also happening, in the area. So the reason I make the comparison between politics and arts coverage is the thing that's amazing about it, and I think it's really almost maybe entirely unique to my job because I've met other people in the field who are at top tier publications who do this work, is I really have a tremendous amount of liberty to write the stories and reviews and criticism that I want to write. So I get to basically decide what I'm going to do. It's very rare when the editors call up and say, you have to do this no matter what, you can't say no. You know what I mean? That happens maybe once or twice a year, tops. So the thing that's cool about that is that, a lot of my predecessors, here and there, the coverage of Go-Go wasn't consistent. And a lot of people, when I started the job 10 years ago, I think there was rightfully skepticism when I approached people in Go-Go because the Washington Post relationship to Go-Go was the typical thing where it was mostly written about whenever breaking out at these shows. It was in the Metro section. It wasn't in the style section or the weekend section as much as it should have been. So I wanted to try to remedy that as much as possible. And I still could do a much, much better job. And I'm always trying to get better. I know it sounds crazy to be like, I'm 10 years into the gig and I'm just starting. But I really do feel like listening and being true to the meaning of music and the importance that it plays in a community, that's a lifelong pursuit. So I definitely feel like I'm just started pushing the boulder up the hill, and I want to keep doing it for as long as I can and be true to this incredible music that happens here. With Go-Go, talking about Bootsy E, what I mean? He was one of the first big profiles I did when I got to the Post 10 years ago. He was, on the radio real heavy with Donnie back then, and getting to spend time with him and tell his story about, the songs he was writing about the football team and his deep, deep history in this music, and how, he was able to do all these different things at the same time. It was just exciting. And I think it was really a good story to write, because I think it's cool when journalism can tell you about your neighbors, the people who live near you, the people who are making the sounds that vibrate the air that we all share together as a community. So I've really tried to do my best to cover GoGo as much as possible. Anybody who's watching this who feels like, well, you've never written about my band or my music, please reach out. It's just a matter of time before I get to it. If you have made sounds that resonate in this community, that's absolutely important to me as a critic, and I want to try to cover it. So, but in the day of the life, yeah, I get to write my own ticket in a lot of ways. So if there are shortcomings in the coverage that I write, that's on me. You know what I mean? And if so, like, as I'm saying, like, as this public service announcement to people who are watching, if you feel like it hasn't been covered enough, or I got something wrong, like, I want to hear about it, and I'm not from the go-go community. I know that. Like, I wasn't born into this music, and it's not, it's the music of Black Washington, D.C., and I'm a white kid from Maryland who has tremendous respect and adulation for it. Like, I think some of the most powerful music I've ever encountered, and I feel so honored to be welcomed as a guest whenever I walk into the go-go. And I felt that way since I started going, when I was in my, old enough to get in, basically. So yeah, I just have like tremendous respect and gratitude for the community, and I want to do, and I always want to do better. And I also want to make sure that I'm trying to move the ball around too, and not be the only person who writes about it at the paper. I'm trying to get other freelancers involved. So also, if you're a music writer out there and you're looking to get started, even if I can't get you in the paper, I'm happy to like meet up and get coffee and talk, or just get, I guess in this situation, get on the phone and talk. Because more voices in the community, the better. And I shouldn't be the only one talking about this stuff in the Washington Post, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess I was asking more sort of a tactical, like what do you do? Like, do you just sit there and listen to music and write reviews?
You want to know about the day to day?
Yeah.
Let's see. I probably have about 2 pieces in the paper a week. One is almost always in the weekend section. Well, actually, let's go before the pandemic, because things are all kind of scrambled. But before the pandemic started and we were covering the nightlife in the weekend section, I'd have like one preview every week of an upcoming concert. So that was one thing that would happen constantly, usually with an interview that I would do over the phone, or if I could meet up for someone for 30 minutes in real life and talk to them. Basically, these are kind of like micro profiles that would appear in the weekend section on Fridays. And then the other piece that I'd write on any week could be anything. It could be an album review. It could be a trend piece about some larger theme that I've noticed in music. It could be, I wrote a big essay last year about how I hate podcasts, basically. You know what I mean? As a sonic experience, as a listening experience. My editors have a really broad idea of like what music coverage can be. It's basically like, how does sound change our world? The thing that's kept me really, really busy during the pandemic, sadly, has been writing appreciations, which are not exactly obituaries. They're like obituary-like essays about the artistic impact and resonance of an artist. So it's not on me to say that they were born in Tuscaloosa in 1936, but it is on me to explain why a pianist like McCoy Tyner was so important to jazz music and what came after him, things like that. So, but again, like hourly, I mean, it's basically an improvisational day. There's tons of listening that goes on. I'm definitely listening to new music every single day for hours. And old music too, to try and contextualize and see everything as a continuity, for sure. And I think I probably do about, on a great day, I think I can get like 4 hours of writing done. Like that's like 4 hours of like straight clacking at the keyboard. And the rest of the time I have to go for a walk to get the ideas generated, or just do some listening, like take a shower, you know what I mean? Like something like not working becomes a kind of work. You know what I'm saying?
The sensory deprivation part where you need to tune everything else out so you can, so
the ideas can arise, because the thing about criticism, the most of the work that I do now isn't like profile interview kind of stuff. It's mostly criticism. It's me writing about my listening experience. So you got to give yourself time to have those experiences. You can't just sit behind a keyboard and so again, my editor is incredibly generous in giving me the time to do that, and because I think it changes the work and makes the work better,
So I'm gonna get to the criticism part in a minute. So, but I just wanted to ask you, as the pop critic, what is your definition of pop music?
Great question. When I was hired, it was everything that isn't classical. Okay. So that could be go-go, bachata, heavy metal, funk, punk rock, jazz, you know what I mean? Afro-Cuban rhythms, anything that isn't classical was my bailiwick, because we have a classical music critic who does that part of the gig. So, and I think as we move deeper into the streaming world, the idea of genres is still with us, but it's slowly eroding away. I think it's always been eroding away, but maybe it's happening a little faster in the streaming times. I talk to high school classes a lot, and I notice that they do not have allegiances to genre the way people from our generation were trained to. Mm-hmm. If you think about the idea of genre, it's basically just a reconstruction of American segregation. You know what I mean? Let's keep white people and black people different. We'll give different names to the music. We'll put them in different parts of the record store. We'll put them on different parts, different pieces of airwaves. You know what I mean? And we'll keep people separate. It's a racist construction, and to see it kind of become more fluid over time is encouraging to me, especially at a time right now when we're so concerned with, we always should be concerned with what's going on with racism in America, because it's absolutely this toxic force that underlies our whole existence and has for a while. But now that it seems to be amplified and people are out in the streets fighting against it in a really acute way, music plays a role in that. And thinking about music is a great sort of can be a great doorway into thinking about how we think about race in America in a lot of ways. So the one thing that I think is really interesting, or a sort of tenet that I formed to my criticism, or I'm trying to do, is thinking about, instead of thinking of genres, think about traditions, like things that are handed down. It's not like a style or a fence that's around you. It's something that's being given to you from your elders that you're going to practice and then pass on down. And that's something you absolutely see in go-go. Go-go music is, despite being so distinctive, it's so fluid. I mean, I remember seeing a TOB show a couple years ago, and they were just like absolutely thunderous. It was so cool. And then they went into We Are the World, and it was so surprising because it just seemed like a total left field song selection. It's like a real sort of, the optimism of the song is so bright and cheerful. And I think We Are the World is kind of ridiculous in a lot of ways too. It's like really simplistic. It never felt more incredible to me, that song, hearing it played to the bounce beat. I mean, it was bonkers. So go-go is totally porous. And I know we can probably talk about this too. I know there's a lot of anxiety in the go-go community about like originals versus covers. Yep. The covers thing, I think, is so important because maybe it's undervalued. I don't want to say what other people think, but I am a huge fan of the covers because I think that it just widens the scope of what can be done. And the fact that like any song can become go-go music and can ostensibly be improved as go-go music is such a testament to the power of more often than not. I'm getting really far afield from your question. Sorry, man.
No, that's fine. No, I mean, that's the whole point of this. The whole point of this is to dig into that stuff. So no, feel free. So yeah, I have been, my come up with prior to Mambo Sauce, as I guess my entree into the business side of go-go, transitioning out of being just a musician in go-go, was predicated on this. Mambo Sauce is going to be the first band that doesn't do any cover songs at all. But that was not necessarily from. I mean, there was an artistic. There was a little bit of snobbery to it, I will admit, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, it was also a business thing because at the time, the really revenue generating, piece of the music industry was publishing. And you don't get publishing off of a cover song, but since then, pre-COVID, the entire economy's flipped, and now of the music industry is flipped, and now publishing is a very small piece of it, and live is the biggest part of it. So now cover songs are not as much of a detriment, and I think that I still think there's a piece of me that probably comes from the punk rock upbringing that I had, which is like, man, what do you mean? Because when I first got in my first go-go band, that it was in Annapolis, I was like, why are we playing other people's shit? I just didn't understand it because I didn't come from that world at all. So I think there's a case to be made on either side of that argument for sure. But I also think if you're going to do, I think there are reasons to do covers. And this is what I always said in Mama's House, like either paying homage to someone that's inspired you, or just like you just said, sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like invoking that experience that you had, which was like, maybe it's not exactly you because you were already into go-go, but say somebody that's never heard go-go and that walks up on TOB and they're playing, well, ass clap is not their song, but they're bouncing, doing a typical bounce beat thing, and they're like, "What is this? I don't even understand this." Then all of a sudden they go into "We Are the World." Then it's like, "Oh, now I have something that I can dig my hooks into and I understand." So I do think that that's a relevant and reason to do it. But I think that it's sort of become a crutch in the go-go community, and it's also how different when what era you came up in. I came up in the 90s where we did cover songs, but we didn't do them verbatim. We chopped them up and we took a hook from this song and a sample from that song, and and it was more like a mashup kind of thing. And then when the Grown and Sexy movement came about, R.I.P. to Maisha, it sort of went into okay, we're just going to play the whole song verbatim with a socket beat underneath it. And to me, it's sort of the creativity of what we were doing just sort of slowly devolved. You know what I mean? But I definitely think there is a way to incorporate covers into what you're doing and still have it be, viable artistically.
Yeah.
But so from sort of switching gears a little bit, from your perspective, so you sort of defined what pop is. What's your definition of a hit?
Oh, good question. These are terms that I wonder if they're just kind of going to evaporate in the 21st century because so much music. Yeah. I'm really bad at crystal balling. I can't, predict the future. And whenever I've tried, I tend to fail. Hits, wow, what do they mean? I mean, you can have a regional hit, and if it builds a strong resonance in your community, that to me is like the first step, I think, for any kind of music. And your community could be entirely digital. It could be entirely online. You can be an artist who's never performed live, but if you form some kind of group, or even if it's very, very tiny, a consensus of agreement around your music, then I'd argue that you have a hit. You know what I mean? I have a band, the band that I played in my 20s, like I said earlier, on Spotify, they rank what's been listened to the most. I don't know how this one song became the song that everyone agrees on. I think it's kind of like a snowball thing. Some people check it out, more people like it, then it kind of like floats itself to the top because more and more people think, oh, this is the consensus pick or whatever. We never released that song as a single. There was no such thing. It was just albums came out and we played the songs live, and that was that. But for whatever reason, the community that's formed around our music, which is relatively small, consecrated that song as the hit song. I like the idea of like a local hit, a regional hit, a go-go specific hit, whatever. Being able to just take all those prefixes away and say that it's a hit. When Backyard did their Adele Hello, that was a hit. You know what I mean? Like, and it reached outside of go-go, and it reached to a broader listenership on the internet, which was great. I think it's better than the original. I like it. And when I hear Hello, when I hear Adele's Hello, shopping at Target or whatever, it makes me miss the
you're like, turn this shit off and put the power beat on.
Right, exactly. When's the DJ gonna blend in that,
right?
So DJ Target, where are you?
Right, the Target DJ.
But that, I mean, I think a hit, the definition is flexible. And I think what we have to start figuring out in the music industry is what is gonna be, I don't know, sustainable. Like it's very, I mean, again, like just how I said, the idea of genre replicates American racism. The music industry replicates American capitalism. And the 99 and the 1%, that exists. In the 1%, you have your Drakes and your Taylor Swifts, and it's going to be really, really hard for people to crack into that. So is there a way that we can make music that resonates in your community, allows you to have a livelihood and keep making it? Those are the things that are most important to me. With go-go writ large, like I know that it's for decades now, it's been this debate of like, how do we bring this music to a national audience, to an international audience? How do we get it to communicate to the masses the way that it communicates to people here in DC? I would love to see that happen too. But more important to me is I just want the music to continue to exist. That is like mission one. And I think with all Don't Mute activism that's happened over the past year, it's been so encouraging to me because I think the community has really come together to make sure that this fundamental thing stays active, you know what I mean? And the biggest challenge for me, even more than getting a hit, I think, is making sure that the things we've been talking about with tradition, like making sure it's getting passed down. Like even like say that you know, T.O.B. had a national hit that was on radio stations across the country next week. That would be incredible. I'd probably be equally, if not more, encouraged to hear a new band of teenagers now in 2020 who are like as tight as T.O.B. emerged. Do you know what I mean? Like that would be equal.
I agree. I think one begets the other. I think that if you're 14 years old and it's not cool to be in a go-go band anymore. You don't, like it's cool because you have a hit. You know what I mean? So if you don't have a hit, then it's not cool anymore. And then the 13-year-old doesn't want to play the shit. They rather go be a rapper because they see Gold Link and Chai Glizzy or whoever that are just going. So I think they're interlocks and because I share the same sentiment. Like I don't feel like those two things are mutually exclusive. I want go-go, like. This is the other thing, because I feel like there are, and I'm not talking about you, but there are some people from outside of the community and there are fans within the community that feel like this is our special thing. Nobody else needs to be involved in it. We don't want the rest of the world involved in it. But I would tell you, from being friends with, I would say 85% of the go-go community, the musicians don't think that way. They want to be Drake. They want to be Beyonce. They just don't know. There are just some certain things that aren't happening in order to make that a reality. But I think that if we're able to figure out a way to make that become a reality, then it does become the cool thing again, and then the tradition gets passed down because there's a reason for it to get passed down other than just straight up traditionalism.
Yeah. I'm with you all the way on it. The other really encouraging thing I have noticed with the younger rappers, especially I know the generations in rap music come fast and furious. So if you're 26, you're a generation ahead of someone who's 23. Yeah. Like with Gunu, rappers like Gunu, Zanman, Young Manny, like they all mention go-go in their music, like in their rhymes. And to me, that is so important. And I hope that young people are listening and thinking, oh yeah, maybe it would be cool to do the thing that these guys are talking about.
Right.
I hope so. It's so awesome that these young rappers think of go-go as part of their musical heritage. Yeah. And it is. And you can hear it. I mean, like rap cadences out of DC, it's the drums of go-go that have shaped and formed them. And there's not a young DC rapper that I've met who would say otherwise. I'm always like, they all listen to go-go. It's all computed into the way that they approach their phrasing, consciously or subconsciously, and they're proud of it. So that's huge to me. And I hope that their peers, that's the question I'm going to start asking these young rappers and be like, yo, do any of your friends play in go-go bands? Like, do you encourage them to? What have you? Because
that's a question. Yeah, that's the question I've been asking. It's one of the questions I got Yadia that puts on Mochella on tomorrow. That's one of the things I'm going to ask him too, since he's from a much younger generation than I am. Like, how many of younger kids do you run across that are actually into go-go? So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But
no, please.
Well, so I know we sort of have a loose definition of what pop music is, and it spans genres. So and obviously the genres are melting into one another. But if there was one genre that's currently producing hits on the Spotify top 50 level, what form of music or genre of music would you say that current go-go, I guess, which would be bounce beat, is most similar to?
It's a great question. I think, first of all, just to rewind and talk about the gig too, I have to, for the job that I have to be invested in all of it. And if I ever start feeling like I don't care about country or metal or what have you, or I become incurious about it, that's when I'll know it's time to quit for sure. So part of it, people, I thought you were winding up to say, which is your favorite? Because a lot of people will say, you cover all this different stuff, but do you have one that you especially like? And the answer to that is just like, if I didn't love it all or feel
Go-Go. What do you mean? I didn't even need to ask the question because I already know the answer.
if I didn't have a feeling, a hunger to experience all of it, then I wouldn't want to do the gig. So that's me answering a question you didn't ask. What has the most connection? I think rap music is the central music of our time, of this century, of this generation. It's a point that I try to make in the post over and over and over again, especially because the readership is the print readership anyway, or the readership, I guess, that I hear the most from in that's arguing against me is saying, yeah, it's the rock and roll world, and they're not ready to put the music of their time to bed yet. And I'm not saying that rock and roll is over and we can't listen to it anymore. Obviously, tradition, music, they don't die. As long as you're listening, as long as someone's listening to it, it is still quote unquote alive. But rap music is the central music of our time. All the other genres copy it. Country artists have raps in their songs now. You know what I mean? Like rock and roll bands from nu metal on down are influenced by rap music. Rap music is the central music of America. It has been for a long time, and it shouldn't be controversial. Yeah. So obviously go-go traditionally, I mean, it runs parallel to the dawn of rap music. I mean, there was that time in the 80s, and I wasn't alive or cognizant enough to know about it, but people were wondering when they both hit in the early 80s, like which one of these will become the next global phenomenon, you know what I mean? So they have, rap music and go-go have grown up alongside each other. They both have an incredible, they're centered around a tradition in a really important and powerful way. And I absolutely think that they're the closest for sure.
Right. Gotcha. So what are your, I mean, speaking on, sort of riffing on your thoughts about rock. First of all, let's clarify this, that Chris Richards of the Washington Post just said that rock is dead and hip hop rules the world. So I'm quoting that, and I'm going to put it real big on the YouTube thing. Just saying.
That's cool.
So, there's this sort of theory about there's a couple of theories that are sort of similar in nature about the cycle of pop music, the cycle of rock versus pop versus whatever. What are your thoughts on that, and which part of the cycle are we in right now, do you think?
Oh, good question. Well,
I believe in that cycle.
I think a lot of people want to draw parallels to rock music and hip hop and say, oh, we're definitely in the, I don't know, like when Puffy came along, like in the late 90s, that was like the equivalent of like Led Zeppelin and all the like super grandeur of like people getting paid tons of money and stuff. I don't think that music quite syncs up in those kinds of parallels. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I love in rap music and also in go-go, let me get to it in a second, but like I love how rap music elders are constantly, I just want to say I love it. I'm encouraged by the fact that young people are finding a way to use rap music to say something specific to their generation that confuses their parents and elders. You know what I mean? Like, it's a really healthy, good thing. Like to be able to hold on to a tradition while mutating it and making it into something that belongs to you, that is a sign of good health. So when all these like mumble rappers came along a few years ago and people were so upset about it, older rap fans were so upset about it, it made me incredibly happy to see that going on, because it should be that way. The young people should take what they've learned and make it their own. And I love being able to listen, because I can love Public Enemy as much as I can love Lil Uzi Vert, and I love approaching music that way. And I think anybody can, you know what I mean? And everybody should. But seeing that consternation, it's going to happen. And you saw it in Go-Go with the bounce beat. I wrote about this many, many years ago, but a lot of the old school go-go acts, they were like, this is just noise, it's anti-musical, what have you. I thought that was incredibly unfair. And I think the bounce has a tremendous amount of musicality to it. It foregrounds different things, you know what I mean? Like those bass lines, those like revving bass lines where you just kind of like, to me, the first time I saw that, I just thought, that is so inventive, you know what I mean? Because you think of the bass line, this is like the bedrock melody that we have to follow. So for someone to say, nah, let me just trash that and turn this instrument into this timbral revving of an engine. Come on, man. That is invention. That is taking what you've learned, twisting the Rubik's Cube around and saying here. And that's just one of the many things about the bounce beat that I think is amazing and incredibly musical. Just because it doesn't have horns, you know what I mean? And like a whole, you know, charted out different kind of melodies that the old groups used to have. It's musical in a completely different way, and as it should be. I'm really excited, and I hope that go-go continues along to happen, where bounce beat becomes the old school thing, and the bounce beat artists are frustrated by whatever the next is. Yeah. And that's how we'll know. That's really how we'll know that go-go is in it for the long haul and it is healthy. You know, when these updates happen and there's generational conflict, it's a sign of good health, and we should step back from it. Of course, if you have a side that you believe in and you want to have an argument about it, absolutely go for it and stand for what you believe in. But if you can just step aside and realize what's actually happening, it's a sign of good health for sure.
Right. I'm sorry, I'm just laughing at a comment. There's a guy, Brooks, a guitar player from Reaction, and he said he's a huge fan of rock. He's like not your typical go-go guy, like Dance Gavin Dance is one of his favorite bands, and Periphery. You know, he says, I feel attacked. Rock ain't dead, it's just scared. No, Brooks, rock is dead. Of course, I'm kidding. But so, I mean, you know, and forgive me, but obviously the show is called Gogotalx. So I'm going to drive everything towards the point of go-go. So as a person, like literally your job, you get a paycheck for dissecting and critiquing pop music for a living. So what is it specifically about go-go? From either a musical standpoint, musicologist, you know, musicological standpoint, or whatever standpoint you think it is. What do you think prevents go-go from entering the mainstream?
That's a great question. There's a received idea that like you have to be in the room to get it. You know what I mean? Like on records, it's not going to communicate the same thing that it does live. I think you could make that argument maybe about all music. You know, being in a room with you know, your community, which is a mix of strangers, of complete strangers, and maybe some of your best friends. Being in a room with those people while there is a musician on the stage and the communal airspace is shaking, I mean, that is a synchronizing thing. That's what music is. You know what I mean? It's a vibration of air, and when we share that vibration, it becomes incredibly, incredibly meaningful. So I think you could argue that like you had to be there is an argument you could make for all music. I don't want to say that discredits the quality of go-go recordings, because I love listening to PA tapes. I love listening to the studio albums. And for me, I get it. I wonder to myself if I wouldn't have the same understanding of it if I hadn't been in the club, you know, to experience it in 3D. You know, but I wonder, I always interrogate myself on that, because I'm like, is that true of jazz? There's not a lot of music that I haven't seen live, you know what I mean? In terms of traditions and genres and things like that. And I'm trying to think of examples where it's like, it's not working for me on the record, but once I went into the room, it made sense. This is all backtracking to say, if we could make everybody who cares about dance music, funky music, about communal music, I mean, hell, gospel music, you know what I mean? If we could all get all those people into a room to experience a go-go, then I think the music would resonate in a huge, huge way. Something that I'm curious about now is like, coming from the punk world, it was very much about going on tour. And for a punk band like mine, it was easy to do. There were 3 of us, we could fit into a van, and we were happy to sleep on the floor every night. And we weren't making a ton of money back home, so if we made a little bit of money in Philadelphia and a little bit in Pittsburgh, that would be great. Part of the go-go mythology, and I'm curious if this still holds up today in 2020, was that, you know, the groups are big, you got 12 people, you got to put them on a bus, it's expensive to do, and also everyone's making money hand over fist in Washington, D.C., so why would you go have a night in Cincinnati where you only make $200 and everybody has to sleep on the floor of a Howard Johnson's? You know what I mean? Like, why would you do that if you could just stay home and print dollars? You know what I mean?
That's
so I wonder if that's still the case. I mean, as we move, you mentioned earlier that like royalty, publishing and touring revenue have switched places in the music industry writ large.
Yep.
So I do wonder if like this music will eventually have to learn to find a way to travel and get out there. I'm encouraged by those nights that they do in Miami, those vacation nights, you know, like I saw Backyard's advertising one recently in the summertime, but I also don't know, is that all, you know, DC, DMV area people traveling down? You know what I mean? Like who in Miami rolls up? Anybody, somebody? And like, is there outreach to be done for those people? This is all the kind of like music business strategizing that I personally am horrible at. So I always try to step away and think about sound and what's happening, what's being communicated through music, because the industry stuff, you know, you're a maestro with it in a way that I certainly am not. So I am really bad at predicting like what has to happen, you know.
Well, no, but
yeah,
no, it's no. I mean, what you said is valuable, and what you said is true. I mean, every single thing you said is true. Yes, it is still the case that you can make. But the only thing that I would challenge is that bands are making money hand over fist locally. Bands are making more money locally than they would on their first or second tour.
Right.
That's definitely for sure. But if they do one or two tours and hit, you know, I don't know if you know, but like for the last 3 years, I've had a booking agency. So all I do is book artists internationally. And granted, yeah, I mean, there are some bands that play for 20 years and never make it over 250, 300 capacity rooms. And then, yeah, if that's the case and you don't hit, then yeah, it makes more sense to just, you know, be able to go home to your wife and kids at night and stay in DC. But if if something does hit or become a hit, you know, it's significantly more lucrative. I mean, like when I was running, you know, entertainment at the casino, I think I was talking to somebody the other day, you know, Boyz II Men hasn't put out a new song in I don't know how many years. And even if they did, like nobody knew about it. I paid them $150,000 to play at the casino. I've never played a go-go band anywhere close to that, and I've had every single one of them at the casino. You know, I mean, I don't work there anymore, obviously, but so my thing is that, and I think people misinterpret what I say as like a criticism of go-go, and it's not really a criticism of go-go. It's I've played in go-go bands. I played in punk bands. I played in classical guitar ensembles. I played in R&B groups. I played in anything and all different kinds of kinds of music. And I've worked with artists in different genres in a business capacity. And there is no more powerful music than go-go ever anywhere that I've ever experienced in the world. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist because I haven't been everywhere in the world, but I'm just saying from everything that I've been around, and it's a lot, there's nothing more powerful than go-go. And so everything that I say is in an effort to try to show the rest of the world, like, you don't know what you're missing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, from a business perspective, you're 100% right. It's too expensive to put bands on the road, you know, compared to what they can make in DC, even though if somebody was able to make it hit, they'd be able to make much more money on the road because go-go is the cheat code. Like I saw TCB play out here in DC, and I think that here in LA, and similar to the Miami thing that you were talking about, most of the crowd was probably from back home. But like you just, you know, when Mambo Sauce used to play with Soja, and it's all white people in Fredericksburg, Virginia, or wherever we were, somewhere in, I don't even remember where we played, South Carolina, somewhere. It's all white people, and they don't know what go-go is. They don't have any context to put around it, but they go nuts because that beat is so powerful, whether it's the bounce beat or whether it's a traditional go-go beat. And so I feel like what you're saying is true, that if we're able to translate it into a record in order to build enough demand to get it outside of the area, and then once they see it, then it's just game over. That's obviously what I was trying to do with Mama.
Yeah. I mean, two things. One, a friend of mine, my best friend, he for many years booked folk music festivals up and down the East Coast. He did one in Maine. They had Rare Essence play like Portland, Maine, to like a bunch of not just white people, but like boomer, you know, and older white crowd. They went bonkers. Like you're saying, the beat is undeniable. Now, the thing is that's unfortunate about that scenario is it just becomes this music that you saw one time at a folk music festival, and it becomes almost like a novelty. Like, oh, I've seen go-go before. I went to this one thing. It doesn't become part of your life, you know? the question I have for you is, has there been any intersection at all with like the jam band community? Like Rare Essence at Bonnaroo is like the answer to
Yeah.
it seems like, because these are audiences that are amenable to the idea of what go-go does. Nonstop music, all the songs woven together. The idea of a trance groove, you know what I mean? Losing yourself to the rhythm, not wanting a break between songs to say thanks very much, t-shirts in the back, you know what I mean? It's jam band. I mean, in a way, go-go descends from Parliament Funkadelic in the same ways that so much white jam band music like Fish and everything else does. I mean, that's the thing about a lot of these groups is everyone cites the Grateful Dead as like the jam band template, but man, P-Funk, give them some credit here, especially anytime a group like Fish does anything that makes you do this. I mean, that's the P-Funk inheritance coming down through their music. So I think like, man, get a go-go band on Bonnaroo every year for 5 years and it's a different conversation maybe.
Well, no, I had a similar question for you, which was, with the popularity of bands like Lettuce and Snarky Puppy and the Motet and stuff like that. Like, why do you think the old school sound hasn't broken through on the? Well, I can give you my answer. My answer is that I was booking for Trouble Funk for a while, and I pitched them. I didn't pitch them to Bonnaroo, but I pitched them to every funk festival that you can think of in the country, and nobody was willing to pay them the amount of money that they wanted. And that was the thing, you know what I mean? And that is the thing that I think hampers it as much as anything, anything musical or otherwise, is the fact that go-go bands can make, a reasonable amount of money playing locally. And so they don't want to take the risk to go outside. And, and I've talked to Rare Essence about this as well. Backyard, who I booked at House of Blues, New Orleans. They have been easier to work with when trying to do, I mean, this was an Essence festival, so it's not exactly like a jam band thing, but they understand a little bit more. Now, granted, they still got paid way more than a band that's only played one time in the market. But thankfully, the buyer there was in DC for a while, so he knows what go-go is. He understands, and it was during Essence Festival, which a lot of people from DC were going to be down there, so there's a reasonable expectation that there was going to be a draw. However, when you're talking about straight up jam band festivals still want to see a draw. They still want to know, are people going to buy tickets to come see you? You know what I mean? Even though it's less of a concern than it is for a straight up headline hard ticket show, they still want to know, if I'm going to pay $5,000 or whatever for this band, like, are you going to sell $5,000 worth of tickets or more? And if not, then I'm not going to book you. And so, yeah, that's really where the difficulty is. It's difficult to build demand for go-go bands in the same way that you build it for a punk band or whatever, which is get in a van and sleep on the floor. Because especially now with a lot of the older bands, Rare Essence ain't sleeping on the damn floor. I can tell you that right now. You know what I mean? And so that's the challenge. But I think you're right. I mean, I think that if if some of these bands were able to be given a shot to play on some of these, then I have talked to Sean G at Live Nation Urban a couple of times about trying to figure out some kind of ways, but nothing solid has materialized there. And I don't mean to misrepresent, like me and him are homeboys, just like he doesn't really know who I am, but I've sent him emails and he's responded to me about go-go shit. So, so, I mean, we'll see. Obviously he's the manager for the Roots too, so he knows who they are. But so sort of moving on to, in the booking form that I send out, the question is, what's one thing that you think could move go-go onto the international stage? And you said, the contrarian question, does it need to? And so I'm wondering, can you expand a little bit upon that? If there's anything, I mean, we already sort of discussed it a little bit, but.
No, well, part of this conversation that I'm really grateful to, and I'm grateful for you asking all these questions, is you've reminded me how everything is really connected. Mm-hmm. The covers and the originals, it's connected. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's a balance. The idea of touring and establishing an audience outside of the city and maintaining the audience that you have in the area, that's a balancing act. So all of these things are connected. again, as a spectator, there seems to me for generations all this anxiety about how do we get it out into the world. And to me, before this conversation, like I said, the answer is like, well, does it need to? If the music is healthy and vibrant here and it exists here, like, is that enough? Like, the most important thing should be making sure that it exists. You have very helpfully pointed out that, like, if there aren't bigger flashes that reach outside of the city, then less people are going to be chasing after the idea, and that will cause the atrophy. So, like, the idea of being successful outside of the city will ensure the continuation of the music inside the city, something I haven't really given enough thought to, and I'm very much going to now, and I thank you for the conversation because it's kind of enlightened me to the connectivity between the two. Fundamentally, getting back, this kind of connects to your idea earlier, like, what is a hit? And I was saying, if you can form a community around your music, even if it is a small community and a loyal one, that to me, spiritually, and I can't tell artists how to feel, but I want that to be enough for musicians in this world. No matter what kind of music you're playing, to be able to make a sound that someone else cares about and stays caring about for longer than the 3 minutes that it takes to listen to it is like an incredible achievement. And this is medicine that I didn't want to take back when I was in my punk band, because we were getting bigger and bigger. And, like, to give you some perspective on how popular or unpopular we were, we probably played 200 shows a year, like, around the country and out of the country. I made enough money to pay rent on a bedroom in Silver Spring that was like $400 a month, plus, like, my student loans and my car payment and all that stuff. But I still had to work at the Washington Post to have health care. You know what I mean? So the money that I worked part-time at the paper making was just like extra dough and mainly a reason to have health coverage.
Right.
That's like how big we were. And I wanted to take it to, quote unquote, the next level, right? Like, why can't we play on, like, Conan O'Brien or something like that?
Right.
And someone told me at the time, it's like, can't you just be happy that you play music that people care about? And this person was in a much higher station musically in life than I was. And I was like, well, that's easy for you to say. Like, you're where I want to be. You know what I mean?
Right.
In hindsight, it was the best advice I never took. You know what I mean? To realize how important it is that a connection has already been made, and, like, keeping that connection strong, that has to be like mission one. If I was to go back and do it again, I would try to not have stars in my eyes and be chasing this bigger thing, because what the group had, even though it was modest, in the grand scheme of things, it was bigger than anything I ever could have imagined when I was a teenager. And people still care about our band to this day. I still get emails from saying, "Oh, I listened to your record." Da, da, da. It brings me incredible contentment to know that it mattered. So I don't want to say to any musician, like, "Hey, be happy where you're at." You know what I mean? But the idea of cultivating the connection that you do have and making that the most important thing, I think you have to have that before you can search for the higher thing. So as I said, your conversation with me today has made me I need to go back and kind of reevaluate my thinking about it, because nobody wants to be told, like, hey, be happy with what you've got. You know what I mean? And your idea that greater success will even further strengthen those hometown connections is something that I really, really have to think about. But I do think that you can't have the hit. You can't break out if those hometown things aren't established. And maybe that's where we're at in the greater conversation over the years, or I shouldn't say where GoGo is at. Because last year we saw the city stand up for this music in a way that was so incredibly inspiring. I mean, the Mochella, the Backyard did on 14th and U Street. I mean, I remember coming home and talking to my wife, and I was like, I'm so glad I was there tonight. Like, it was something that I will never forget in my whole life. Like, it was the most DC thing. You know what I mean? Like, it was so beautiful. And then the photos later that were taken up from the apartment buildings of, like, the crowd. Oh my God, it almost made me cry. It was so incredible to see the city rally for its music and say, no, we belong here. We're a part of this city, and we're not going anywhere. Incredibly inspiring. And then also there was kind of like a victory lap for that at the GoGo Awards at Ballou High School that I wrote about in November. It was amazing. I mean, Sauce got a lifetime achievement thing, and he was like, "Go for life," was his speech. And I just thought, yeah, go for life. You know what I mean? Like, as long as we're all alive, like, let's keep this music happening, and let's make sure that we're giving it to the young people to make sure that they can have it, and they can change it into whatever the next iteration of the bounce beat is. That's going to be great, but ensuring that the thing that stays home is most important, is essential. I don't want to be that snobby person that you're talking about to say this is ours, you know what I mean? Or because first of all, it's not mine in the first place, you know what I mean? Like I consider myself a guest in the Go-Go always.
Me too.
But like at the same token, it's like, yeah, I have to reevaluate my contrarian position. So this has been a great conversation, and I appreciate you.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't even trying to disagree. I just think that, just like if I just see that it's not cool for the kids anymore. So if it's not cool anymore, then they're not going to do it anymore, and then it's just going to die out. And I see, and part of the reason I wanted to do this series was because, and it's funny, every episode I'm like, part of the reason I wanted to do this series was this, and I probably said about 500 things by now, but is that there's a lot of focus on real quick, if you're on Instagram watching, there's only 15 seconds remaining, so head over to YouTube like it says to in the comments, so you can see both sides of the conversation, because it's about to end on Instagram in about 5 seconds. Part of the reason that I just, sorry, I got distracted for a second, but part of the reason why I decided to do this was there's a lot of people talking about the history, the cultural impact, the musical impact, the, I guess all those things that I just said of go-go, but there are very few people talking about what are we doing? What's the next thing? You know what I mean? And so that's sort of where my head is always been at from the very first day I joined go-go. It's like, how can we make this better or change, or I don't want to say change, because it's not like, there are certain things you don't want to change, like, of course, or else it's not go-go anymore. And I get that, but at the same time, how to improve, I guess, is a better word. So that's sort of what I always, what I'm trying to do with this is like figure out how do we get to that next stepping stone, as opposed to just being like, oh, we have this great thing here, let's put it in a museum and encase it in amber, and then everybody kind of look about it like, oh, look at this cool thing they had in DC, because it is a cool thing, you know what I mean? But at the same time, I think personally that it could be cooler if it was on a bigger scale, and every musician in go-go that I've talked to agrees with that. And additionally, I can count on two hands the amount of musicians in go-go that make a full-time living playing go-go. Very few people do that. And there are a lot, which I'm sure you're familiar with, a lot of artists that the average person has never heard of that do. And so my thing is, if I shoot for the moon, like maybe I'll catch a star. So if we shoot for Drake, maybe we'll catch Soja or whatever, because Soja plays go-go, like, you know what I'm saying? Those guys make a living. I mean, they have obviously an incredible advantage that most people in go-go don't have, which is having the same complexion as us. But there are other bands that, not that I'm equating P-Funk to Soulja, obviously have a lot more cultural impact, but there are bands that are making a living playing music, and they may not be millionaires, but they don't have to go to work at Pepco on Monday. You know what I mean? That's what I want to see.
Right. I think it's totally important and valid. The thing that I've realized in this conversation too is that I think anybody who loves go-go always, no matter what tactic you're taking, I think they probably want the same thing, which is for the music to continue.
Yeah.
Keeping it strong at home, that's one way to keep it continue. Being ambitious and trying to make it resonate outside of the community, that's another way to make it continue. I presume different artists are going to do it in different ways, and I hope that they think expansively and aggressively about that too. I mean, I'm really looking forward to tuning in tomorrow night to see what he has to say about it, because he's been such a huge part of galvanizing the community, and he's a younger dude. So this idea of like, how do we make it continue and get these young musicians playing this music? It's probably the paramount concern. I think you're right. So you've changed my mind a lot Sunday talking to you about this. I don't ever want to swoop in and pretend like I know what's best for go-go music, or what musicians should do, or they should be content with this, or they should hope for that. Like, musicians are going to do what they're going to do. And I definitely am an observer I try to be a cheerleader when I can, and if there's something I can do to help raise awareness to like what is happening, I want to do it. And some of that is like the tradition building. Like if we did have, you know, a formidable go-go museum, and if you saw big signs about go-go music at the airport when you flew into Dulles and international, like those are good things. Even if they're superficial cosmetic things, they just cements this music's rightful reputation as important in the city.
Well,
But that's to say, like, it shouldn't be like, oh, we got our sign at the airport, so now we don't need to worry about trying to go on tour. Like, it should be a multi-pronged effort, I guess, right?
I think painting Black Lives Matter on, you know, on the street is symbolic as well, but it's important symbolism, and it does, you know, it does something for the greater movement. And I think that what you just suggested would be the same thing. You know what I mean? It would be like, you know, like I do think that go-go should be as integrally integrated. That's not what I meant to say, but as integrated into the tourism sector of DC as country music is to Nashville. Like it's as, if not more important. I mean, the only thing is that country music has spread out amongst the rest of the world. You know what I mean? Where go-go hasn't quite, although it really has. It's just people don't know what they're listening to. You know what I mean? I mean, if you string together the videos of Nelly, Hot in Here, Beyonce, Crazy in Love, Jill Scott, you know, whatever, all of those songs, My Mic Sounds Nice, Hold It Now, Hit It by Beastie Boys, Rock the Bells. You know, if you string all those videos together and play it for somebody in California, they'd be like, oh shit, I didn't know all that was go-go, but it's all go-go. You know what I mean? But obviously it doesn't have the name recognition of country. But yeah, no, I definitely don't think that those two things are mutually exclusive. I think that there's been fear instilled into the hearts of go-go musicians by the fact that EU blew up, toured, came back, wasn't hot anymore. But at the same time, Junkyard has gone like this throughout the years. They've never stopped cranking the entire time. They've just been popular sometimes. They're not popular sometimes. They're popular sometimes. They're not popular sometimes.
Yeah.
That could have happened whether EU went on tour and had the butt or not. So, you know, and then because they came back and were popular again. And, you know, so that's just a natural cadence of things. So I think that using that as an excuse to not shoot higher is a mistake, because it's, for one, it's anecdotal evidence, and I think that also there just isn't enough data around go-go to say, because again, there's sort of these tropes that exist throughout the culture of, if you go outside and you make a bigger hit, then that means that you can't come back home, which is not, I don't believe is borne out by evidence. There's also what you talked about earlier, which is you can't experience the music on record in the way that you can experience it live. That may be true that that's been the case thus far, but that doesn't mean that's the case. Like, you know, nobody knew they wanted to hear Welcome to DC until we made Welcome to DC. And there are some people that, you know, may agree or disagree that that's real go-go or not, but I think it is. It's just a different kind of go-go. You know what I mean? Like Lil Uzi Vert and J. Cole are both hip hop. They don't sound anything alike, but they're both hip hop, you know. Or Zan Man and Chuck D are both hip hop artists, but you couldn't find two artists that sound more dissimilar. So I don't see why go-go can't have that same breadth of sound.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point. I would agree with it completely. I wonder, you know, going back to EU and the butt, I wonder if it's an issue, and I'm just like spitballing things here because, as I've said before, like I'm not a music biz strategizer in any way. And in fact, when I do, I'm like always stepping in mud. Maybe I'll step in mud right here too. But I wonder if it's an issue of finding like a champion, like a Spike Lee, you know what I mean, who puts the music in a film and directs the music video and really gets behind it. You know, someone who already has a national audience, you know, picking up. That could be like somebody in a white jam band who's like, yeah, we're going to have these guys be our tour mates for a year, or someone putting it in a feature film in a certain way. I wonder if those are certain ways to kind of, you're talking about catching stars. Like, I wonder if that's one way for it to happen. Unfortunately, you just can't plan that out. You know what I mean? You can't say, hey, influential tastemaker, can you carry this whole giant tradition of music into the limelight for us for 5 minutes, please?
Right.
But also, maybe you can. I don't know. This is a changing moment in America. A lot of white people are doing a lot more investigation of self and like who they have decided to share their megaphone with. You know what I mean? I hope that continues to be the case, and it isn't just some superficiality that we're seeing on social media. So maybe this is a time for, someone to come and say, check out Go-Go Music.
Yeah, I'd be honestly slightly concerned about it, about a white act or a white person being that person. Like I'm already concerned about myself, because obviously the optics of, like I don't want to be seen as anybody's trying to be anybody's white savior. I literally just started playing this music when I was 15 years old, and I haven't stopped being involved in the community since. So when I think, I'm always just thinking in terms of the community, but I have to remind myself sometimes that, like, hey, don't forget what you look like. You got to chill sometimes. And
Sure.
So that's definitely a thing. But yeah,
that's a lesson I definitely learned too. Because when I started covering Go-Go at the Post 10 years ago, I will, be straight up about it. I was proud of myself. You know what I mean? I was like, the critics who came before me weren't going to the club the same way I was. They weren't going to go to the Bounce Beat Awards at the Armory. You know what I mean? Which was one of the greatest shows I've seen in my whole life, by the way. Mm-hmm. And I definitely kind of gave myself a little pat on the back for my inclusivity. But now I realize, obviously, like, I was absolutely a guest, honored to be there, and I know what my shortcomings are in talking about the music as well too. So anybody who's watching tonight, if you feel the Post hasn't covered the music that you care about, or in a way that you care about, if you have any criticism for how I've written about Go-Go personally, I want to hear it. I want to get better. I want to make sure that I'm not the only one doing it. I'm sharing the megaphone and letting other voices get in the paper here and there. So anybody who has anything to say, please reach out for sure.
How should people reach out to you?
The best way is make me sound like the oldest 41-year-old on earth. But I love that email. My email address is in my Twitter handle. It's Chris, CHRIS.Richards@washpost.com. That's the best way, because I check that scrupulously. The world of DM to me is this, like, I hate to be like ageist and self-deprecating about it, but like Instagram DMs and Twitter DMs, it just becomes this like mysterious quagmire of, yeah, that's it, perfect. Please drop me a line anytime. I really want to hear what we can do better, and I want to try and improve what I'm doing and what the paper is doing in general, and do justice to this music in any way that we can, for sure.
Dope, man. Chris, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you always showing love, to the community, and let's definitely keep the conversation going, and hopefully we'll be talking about the next Go-Go Billboard #1 pretty soon.
I hope so. It's an honor to be invited on the show. Thank you so much, especially considering the guests that you've had. To be, in the same little computer window as them is a deep honor, and with you as well. So thank you guys so much, and thanks for everybody for watching, and I appreciate it. Deep gratitude.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris. I really appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. That was Chris Richards, pop critic for the Washington Post, Go-Go fan, DMV native. We appreciate him for coming on. Tomorrow we have Yadia, who is the creator of Mochella. Very excited about that. Make sure you go get your Go-Go as Fuck t-shirt right now. You can get them at gogotix.co/shop. And here's a little more info about it for you.
You can find me in VIP, all eyes on me. Yeah, where the girls are, this is how your night should be.
All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm off on Friday, and then we'll be back next week with Kyrie Pratt, founder of Northeast Groovers, and Cy Smith, who has been out here in LA for the last 20 or so years, but she's a former background singer for Whitney Houston, on American Idol, written songs for Santana as well as others, but also used to throw go-go's in LA. So see you guys next week, or see you tomorrow, I'm sorry, and then see you again next week. Thanks so much for tuning in.